great status symbol. It was found in a wood-lined pit, along with an iron tool and fragments of antlers, stone and glass. During 2010, the helmet was on display at the British Museum for several months. It returned to York for the reopening of the Yorkshire Museum on the 1st of August 2010. On the right, you can see some of the buildings have bricked-up windows on the first floor. This comes from the Georgian window tax. In 1696, a law was passed on which owners were taxed on the amount of windows their property had. To avoid paying this tax, windows were bricked up. These days, when something is expensive, you'll hear people say, "That's daylight robbery." It is possible this saying comes from the old tax. You either paid up or lost your daylight, hence daylight robbery. Looking ahead on the corner, you can see the award-winning modern extension to the York St John University, formerly a Victorian Anglican teacher training college. It became the College of Ripon York St John before being granted university status in 2006, and it has around 6,000 students. It is one of two universities, the other being York University. This is situated on the eastern outskirts of the city and opened in 1963. It boasts over 15,000 students and is regularly voted into the top 15 universities in the country. Behind the wall, to the right, you can see York Minster, or to give it its proper title, the Cathedral and Metropolitical Church of St Peter in York. It is both a minster and a cathedral. The name Minster derives from the Latin monasterium. From here, the local monks would go out to teach or minister. It is also a cathedral because it contains the throne of a bishop. This is taken from the Latin cathedra and means seat. In York's case, the seat of an archbishop. Keep looking on your right, and as we turn, you will see Monk Bar, which is the tallest of York's gateways, standing at 63 feet, or 19.2 metres in height. On the top stand life-size stone figures known as the Wild Men of York. Legend says they will come alive and throw their boulders down onto anybody daring enough to attack the city. As we leave Monk Bar, look along the street to your right, and set back you can see the wonderful county hospital, built in 1850, which is now used as apartments. Keep looking to the right, and you can see some older buildings on Monkgate, dating from the 17 and 1800s. Any earlier buildings on this street were destroyed in the Siege of York in 1644. If we were to follow the road ahead of us across the roundabout for about 10 miles, we would come to Castle Howard, a stately home dating back to about 1700. Castle Howard is where the period drama Brideshead Revisited was filmed. With its elegant house, beautiful gardens and lake, it is well worth a visit. We are moving into Foss Bank and running alongside York's second river, the Foss, on our left. It probably gets its name from the Latin word fossa, which means ditch or stream. There is no longer any commercial river traffic on the Foss, which was made into a canal in 1792. Today, both the Ouse and the Foss are mainly used by pleasure boats and wildlife. Looking to the right is Sainsbury's supermarket. In the 1980s, when this was being built, workmen unearthed hundreds of skeletons here. Work was stopped, and an investigation found this site to be the largest Jewish burial site outside of London, dating back to 1177. The chief rabbi was called in, the land was consecrated and declared sacred, and the bodies were left in peace. This area is known as Dewberry, which means Jewish borough or town. If you look to your right, you will see that the city walls come to an end. That's because a wall was not needed at this side of the city due to the King's Fish Pool, which formed a man-made defence against attack. This is one of the reasons people think the walls aren't complete. It is because there seems to be sections missing. The walls never completely circled the city, as there was no need for a wall where they met water. There would have been a tower at the end of the wall known as a postern. It was demolished in 1829 to make way for traffic. The tallest red brick building straight ahead at the lights is the head office of DEFRA, the Department of the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. The building itself is modern, but notice how the architect has tried to get it to fit in with Old York by putting curves and pillars and using differently coloured stones. If you look closely, you may be able to pick out that it also has some bricked up windows, copying those of the daylight tax era in 1696. Ahead of the bus, we can see a tall chimney standing high and proud, but it's not actually attached to anything anymore. It is all that is left of the York Destructor Incinerator, which was used to burn the city's rubbish. It was closed some years ago. The chimney itself has been preserved due to the fact it still has camouflage paint on it, dating back to the Zeppelin raids of the First World War. As we turn onto Peasholm Green, on our right is St. At the bar, but nobody ever buys him a drink. A young lady sits looking into the fire, but nobody has ever seen her face, and a pair of legs which run around, bringing a whole new meaning to the phrase getting legless in a pub. This brings us into Stonebow. This is our nearest stop for York's most famous street, the Shambles, the medieval cobbled street of the butchers, the market, the city centre shops, and the Merchant Adventurers Hall. Please alight here for any of these places. The Merchant Adventurers Hall, which unfortunately we do not pass on our tour, can be found by alighting here and turning left into Fossgate just ahead, and then you will find the entrance about 1 minute's walk on the right. Built between 1357 and 1361, the Merchant Adventurers Hall is probably the finest medieval guild hall in Europe and is said to be one of Prince Charles's favourite buildings. Please see your red leaflet for information about any current special offers on admissions. Looking ahead, we can see the small church hall of St Crux. Just in front of St Crux on the right is York's shortest street with the longest name, Whitna Gate. We think it gets its name from a corruption of an old Saxon saying Whitna, meaning it's neither one thing nor the other. The street only has 3 properties, numbers 1, 1A and 1.5. It never gets to 2. Just past the church hall of St Crux on the right is the Shambles, York's most photographed street. The Shambles probably gets its name from an old Danish word, fleshamels, which means the street of the butchers. The flesh was the meat, and the shamel was a large window ledge outside the shop where meat would be displayed. Look to the right, and you may get a brief view along the Shambles. At the far end, you can see how the houses nearly touch at the top. It is said that 2 men can lean out of the windows and shake hands across the street. If you heard the shout, "Gardez-lou," you would very quickly get under the overhang of the buildings, as Gardez-lou means "watch out for the water," and meant that the contents of somebody's chamber pot was about to be deposited on your head. Looking ahead is the Church of All Saints pavement, which has a beautiful lantern tower instead of a spire. In medieval times, a fire used to be lit in the top of the tower in order to guide travellers safely back to the city. There was no street lighting then, and so York was not as easy to find after dark as it is today. Also, York was surrounded by a great forest, the Forest of Galtrees. It was dangerous to be lost there at night, as it is recorded that there were wild animals and robbers in the forest. We move into Coppergate. It doesn't get its name from the metal copper as you might think, but from cupra, the Norse word for cup maker. It was when the new Coppergate shopping precinct was being built in the late 1970s and early 1980s that over 40,000 finds from a Viking settlement were unearthed, beautifully preserved by the silt and mud around here. What was found here was so important that it even changed the way we teach about Vikings in the national school curriculum. Today you can see what was found in the Jorvik Viking Centre, where you can travel back in time over 1,000 years in York's history to experience the sights, the sounds and even the smells of Viking York. You can visit the Viking Centre from our next stop, but please remain seated until we arrive at the Clifford's Tower stop. We are now moving into Tower Street and the site of the castle. This is your stop for the Castle Museum, Clifford's Tower, York Boat River Cruises, the Jorvik Viking Centre, York Dungeon. Our next scheduled stop will be the York Railway Station, so if you wish to get off at any of our other stops before then, please move well in good time and wait for the bus to stop before alighting. These days it is the Crown Court. As we pass by, you can see the bars in the centre. Ahead we can see a square tower marking the end of this section of the city wall. This is Fishergate Postern Tower, which stands where the wall met the River Foss, which would have been much wider than it is today. There were 6 postern towers on the walls of York. Postern means rear entrance, and this is the only such tower still remaining. This projection is part of a garderobe, which is a medieval toilet chute. The waste would come out of the chute and drop directly into the King's Fish Pool down below. Over the hedge to our left is the graveyard of St George's Church, which has just one upstanding headstone in it. Those on the bottom deck may see this headstone through the gates on the left as we turn. This is the grave of Dick Turpin, the notorious Georgian highwayman who robbed stagecoaches in the 18th century. Dick Turpin was buried in the graveyard of the original St George's Church in 1739. Since his death, Turpin has become a romantic figure in English history, but the truth is far from the legend. The legend tells of a man who rode a horse called Black Bess. He would jump out from behind trees in front of stagecoaches shouting, "Stand and deliver, your money or your life." It was at this point you would give him all your money and everybody would go home happy. In truth, he was believed to be a thief, a poacher, a burglar and a murderer, not a nice man. And he never had a horse called Black Bess. That was made up about 100 years after his death in a novel called Rookwood by the Victorian novelist Harrison Ainsworth. Turpin was actually from Essex, but came to York to avoid capture using the assumed name of John Palmer. Clothesline. Straight ahead of us is Walmgate Bar, the most complete gateway on a city wall, not only here in York, but also in the United Kingdom. This is because it's still boiling liquids. As we turn right, look to the right, and you will have a brief view inside the Barbican. Imagine being trapped in there, with the soldiers throwing all kinds of nasty things down from above. In 1828, the city's cattle market was relocated to this area. Cattle and sheep were brought here from all over the country to be traded. The flat grassed areas at the foot of the walls were where livestock were kept in pens awaiting their sale. In 1971, the market was moved again, this time to Merton, a village just outside of York, and was renamed the York Livestock Centre. On our left is the Barbican Leisure Centre, which is named after the Barbican at nearby Walmgate Bar. This is where the UK Snooker Championship has been held many times, and it is also a music and entertainment venue. On our right is Fishergate Bar. This is the smallest of the 5 medieval gateways, first recorded in 1315. The red painted stone above the archway reveals the date of the current bar, which is 1487. 2 years after that date, the gateway was attacked and damaged in the Yorkshire Peasants' Revolt against Henry VII. The rebels burned the gates of the bar after murdering the Earl of Northumberland. The gateway was bricked up soon after and wasn't reopened until 1834 to give better access to the cattle market. Fishergate is the road to Fulford, a village just south of York. This was the site of the Battle of Fulford on the 20th of September 1066, where the Vikings beat the Saxons. The Saxon army then returned the favour at the Battle of Stamford Bridge, just 5 days later. Just 3 weeks later, however, there was a third, more famous battle, the Battle of Hastings, where the Saxons, led by Harold Godwinson, were defeated by the Normans, led by William the Conqueror. Ahead we can see the Travel Lodge, which is a modern building, but you can see how the architect has tried to get the building to fit in with Old York. He's put a turret shape on it and covered the walls in magnesian limestone, the same stone the Minster and the city walls are made of. The idea is that eventually it will blend in with its older surroundings. Look to the left, and you can see in the distance a glass structure above the River Foss. This is York's flood barrier. A barrier is lowered from this structure to stop the River Ouse backing up the River Foss, and this stops the eastern side of the city from flooding, unless it fails, as it did in such spectacular fashion on Boxing Day 2015. We move on to Skeldergate Bridge and cross the River Ouse, York's main river. Look to your right to see Ouse Bridge, the oldest of the bridges built in 1821, replacing various older bridges dating back to Viking times. Look to your right, and you will see the city walls at Bale Hill, a grass mound with trees growing on it. Bale Hill was the site of William the Conqueror's second castle, dating to around 1068. Nothing remains of it, however, because it was only ever made of wood, and nobody wanted to pay for its upkeep. Eventually, it was found to be in such a sad state of repair, it was pulled down. Notice the buildings around become much more modern outside the walls, but don't be fooled. There used to be older buildings outside the city walls, but in 1644, York was under siege for 3 months during the Civil War. Around 30,000 parliamentarian troops surrounded the city. However, it is said it was the royalists defending the city who pulled down the buildings outside the walls to get a better view of those attacking them. Bishopthorpe Road has been named in the Times as one of the top 30 of the coolest places to live in the country. In 2014, the Tour de France passed through this area on its way into York. A great street party was held here, and some of the local pubs even changed their names. The Slip Inn became La Slip, and the Swan became La Swan. As we set off through the lights, look left and keep looking left for a brief chance to see the smallest house in York. Watch out for the house at the top of the hill with a large black door with number 76 on it. Just after it, look in the gap and there is a door with the number 76A on it. This claims to be the smallest house in York. We are now in an area of Victorian and Edwardian York. With the arrival of the railways to York in the 1800s, the city grew rapidly. More houses were needed to accommodate the growing population, which had shot up from 17,000 in 1801 to a staggering 77,000 by 1881. These new suburbs were built outside the city walls, with back-to-back terraces to house the people who had come to York to work on the railways and in the chocolate factories. Once the railways had arrived, York became much easier to get to and quickly became quite a tourist destination for the middle classes. No longer did you have to make the long and dangerous journey down south for entertainment by horse-drawn carriage, and so York soon became the leisure and pleasure capital of the north. One of York's most famous sons is Joseph Rowntree, a Quaker remembered and revered both for his outstanding work towards improving the lot of working people, including his own employees, and for his work in the famous Rowntree Confectionery Company of the same name. In 1827, his father set up a grocer's shop in Pavement, where Joseph learnt his trade. Joseph's younger brother Henry, knowing that he would never inherit the grocery business, went to work as an apprentice to his cousins, the Tuke family, who were dealing in tea, coffee and cocoa. In 1862, Henry Isaac Rowntree acquired the cocoa side of his cousin's business. Henry was not a brilliant businessman and was near bankruptcy when, in 1869, his elder brother Joseph was sent to assess his finances and rescue his business. Henry died in 1883, and the business passed to his brother, who, in time, expanded the business to the chocolate factory on the northern side of the city, which still exists today. He set up 3 influential trusts that still bear his name today, and which continue his legacy in the fields of poverty, housing, international peace, social justice, and democratic reform. Rowntree later merged with Macintosh, and the joint company became part of Nestlé in 1988. Many sweets and chocolate bars that are a much-loved part of British life are manufactured in the York factory, like Kit Kat, Aero and Yorkie. In fact, the number of Kit Kats produced here in York in just 5 minutes would be enough to outstack the height of the Eiffel Tower. In 2012, Nestlé celebrated the 150th anniversary year of Rowntree's. In Camplesham Road, we pass a modern housing estate known as the Chocolate Works, which gives a clue to what was in this area. Behind the buildings on the left, we can see a brief sight of what remains of the Terry's chocolate factory. Sadly, Terry's no longer makes chocolate here in York. The factory was closed down in 2005 and production was moved elsewhere. Its most famous product, the chocolate orange, is now made in Europe. The chocolate orange has become very much a part of Christmas tradition in this country. A survey has revealed that a Terry's chocolate orange finds its way into 1 in 10 Christmas stockings. Terry's was thought to be the first chocolate manufacturer of an assorted box of chocolates, which of course became known as Terry's All Gold. If you look through the trees on the left at the clock tower, can you spot what's strange about it? It has no numbers on the clock face, just the letters spelling the words Terry York, a reminder of over 200 years of chocolate making in the city. To see villains hang at the Tyburn. The most notorious person to be hanged at the Tyburn was none other than Dick Turpin, a highway robber who was executed here on the 7th of April, 1739. Today, the Knavesmire holds around 15 days of horse racing a year, the highlight of which is the Ebor Festival that takes place in August. York Racecourse also had the honour of hosting Royal Ascot in 2005, whilst the Ascot course was being renovated. In 1982, when the late Pope John Paul II visited the United Kingdom, it was the first time a reigning Pope had visited this country. He came to the racecourse here in York and gave mass to over 200,000 people. The Knavesmire is also used for music concerts, circuses, fairs, and has been the home to the largest beer festival in the north of England on many occasions. people associated with York include Alcuin, who was born near here in 732 AD. He became a scholar, ecclesiast, poet and teacher. Margaret Clitheroe was born in 1552. She was a butcher's wife and lived in York in the Shambles. She was accused of harbouring Catholic priests in her home and arrested. On March the 25th, 1586, Margaret Clitheroe was taken to Ouse Bridge, where she was placed under a door and stones were then piled on top. The idea was to get her to confess, but Margaret stayed silent and was crushed to death. She was made a Catholic martyr for her beliefs and was canonised in October 1970 as one of the 40 English martyrs. A relic, said to be her hand, is held at the Bar Convent in York, and she is now known as St Margaret Clitheroe. Guy Fawkes was born in York in 1570. He went to St Peter's School, which still exists today, and is the oldest private boys' school in the country. But of course he is famous for trying to blow up the Houses of Parliament in 1605, in what became known as the Gunpowder Plot. Fawkes was discovered guarding 36 barrels of gunpowder, enough to reduce the House of Lords to rubble, and so he was arrested. Most of his fellow conspirators fled from London as they learned of the plot's discovery. On their trial on the 27th of January 1606, 8 of the conspirators, including Fawkes, were convicted and sentenced to be hanged, drawn and quartered. Today we remember the Gunpowder Plot annually, with fireworks on November the 5th, Bonfire Night. As we head back towards the city, we travel up an area of York known as the Mount, possibly due to it being the highest land in the city. The Mount was always one of the more favoured areas to live, even in Roman times. The large buildings around this area date mainly from the George's son, Caracalla, might have had the soldiers killed if they had tried to stop him from seizing power. In 2014, researchers from the York Archaeological Trust, who were leading the investigation, announced tantalising evidence that the men were possibly gladiators brought to Britain from across the Mediterranean. They would have fought in an amphitheatre, which is yet to be found. Looking ahead, you will see Micklegate Bar. This is one of the 4 main gateways into the city of York. Micklegate's name comes from Mickleth, meaning Great Street, and it is said to be the front door to York. It is also known as the Royal Entrance, as it is the custom for every monarch who visits York to ask permission of the Lord Mayor to be allowed into the city through this gateway. Every monarch has done this except for 2. Henry VIII, who on his second visit didn't go through the ceremony allowing him into the city, and Queen Victoria. Queen Elizabeth II visited Micklegate Bar during part of her Diamond Jubilee celebrations in 2012 and asked the Lord Mayor for permission to enter. The Lord Mayor, of course, is never going to say, "Not today, ma'am, you can't come in." This is because Micklegate Bar was also known as Traitors' Gate, where the heads of traitors would be chopped off, boiled, rolled in tar and stuck on a spike on the top, as a warning to those coming into the city. We are now moving into Queen Street. Ahead of us is York's modern railway station, opened in 1877, when it claimed to be the largest railway station in the world. It is no longer the largest, but is still an amazing piece of architecture, having been built on a long curve. The first permanent station was built down to our right inside the walls. The large arches were knocked through the walls to allow the trains into the station in 1841. The trains would go through the arches and then have to sweep left to the old station inside the walls. It wasn't very practical, as once you got the train in there, it then had to be turned around to get back out, and this proved to be problematic. It would have been fine if it was only 1 or 2 trains a day, but York was becoming a very busy station, which soon saw over 300 trains a day coming to York. The new station was built to alleviate this problem in 1877. This stop is for the railway station and the former Royal York Hotel. From here you can also catch the Yorkshire Coastliner buses to the east coast. On the opposite side of the road you can board the Coastliner buses back as far as the Holiday Inn on Tadcaster Road using your tour bus ticket. was renamed Railway Street. But in 1971, a century after his death, the street was given back its original name. To our left are the Memorial Gardens. These are gardens dedicated to those who lost their lives in the First and Second World Wars. This is our nearest stop for the National Railway Museum. If you take a trip around the National Railway Museum, you will find something in there for everyone, not just the rail enthusiast. Do allow plenty of time for your visit there, as the museum is huge. It is also every Yorkshireman's favourite price to enter: free. In the National Railway Museum, take a look around the Great Hall, where you can get up close to all the engines. These include a replica of Stephenson's rocket and Mallard, the world's fastest steam locomotive, which was recorded travelling at 126 miles per hour in 1938, a record that has never been beaten. You may also see the most famous engine of all, the Flying Scotsman, although it has been away for a massive and costly refurbishment in recent times. Thomas the Tank Engine is also known to make an appearance at certain special events. There are also modern trains, such as the Japanese Shinkansen, more commonly known as the Bullet Train, which was presented to the National Railway Museum in 2001 and is the only one outside of Japan. You will be able to hear the stories of people who worked on the railways down the years. There is the Palaces on Wheels exhibition, which tells the story of royal transportation throughout the years, and is always a particular favourite with the ladies. And if you're thirsty or hungry, you can go to the dining car restaurant. We pass through a modern arch put in the city walls to allow for easier traffic flow in 1876, and move onto Lendal Bridge, which was opened in 1861, but it collapsed and wasn't reopened until 1863. It crosses the River Ouse, York's main river, which takes its name from the Celtic or pre-Celtic Oudsos, and probably means simply water or slow-flowing river. On the left is a tower with a conical-shaped roof. This is Barker Tower. It used to be the ferryman's cottage and was part of the city's defences when a chain would have been stretched across the river to the tower on the far bank to stop ships from attacking the city and to stop ships from leaving without paying their taxes. Our next stop is for the museum gardens, the Yorkshire Museum, Betty's Tea Rooms and York Boat River Cruises. Ahead of us is York Minster, the jewel in York's crown and the largest Gothic cathedral in Northern Europe. This present building took 252 years to complete. It was started in 1220 and not finished off until 1472. We say it's complete, but in actual fact the central tower should have a spire, about another 32 metres or 100 feet in height on the top, but the weight of the spire would have collapsed the central tower, so it was never built. The Minster has 128 stained glass windows containing over 3 million pieces of glass. This brings us into Exhibition Square. This is the nearest stop for York Minster, the Art Gallery, King's Manor, Bootham Bar and the nicest section of the city wall, as well as the Visit York Information Centre. Thank you to anyone leaving us at this point. We hope that you have enjoyed your tour with York City Sightseeing. We hope you will join us again here or at any of our other destinations worldwide.
I know.